The roar of chainsaws shattered the stillness of the morning as I sped down the narrow dirt track leading to my lake cabin. When I arrived, I froze in my tracks and my heart nearly stopped. Right through the center of my land, slicing my cabin in half like some sick prank, stood a newly erected fence courtesy of the HOA. It was tall, hideous, and smeared in the typical lifeless beige you see in cookie-cutter suburbs. Tacked onto it were fresh signs, "Private HOA property and no trespassing." Two men in reflective vests were busy hammering the final piece into place like they had every right to be there. "What the hell is this?" I barked, voice laced with fury. One of the workers, a burly guy in an orange vest, turned around with a smug grin. "HOA's orders," he replied. "This area's now part of the Lakeside Meadows Association. If you're not a member, you're not welcome." My blood started to boil. This is my land, my family's cabin. You can't just slap a fence through the middle of it. He gave a careless shrug. "Take it up with Karen. She's the HOA president. She says you're trespassing on their property now." Before I could spit out another word, a sleek black SUV pulled up. Out stepped a tall woman with flawlessly curled blonde hair, oversized designer shades, and an air of entitlement that hit like a slap in the face. Karen, no doubt. She gave me a once-over like I was something stuck to her shoe. "You're illegally occupying HOA property," she said with a syrupy, fake smile. "Part of this cabin now sits on what we've designated as an HOA road, and you're blocking access to our lake. So we marked our territory." She gestured toward the fence like she was showing off a trophy. "Also, we're billing you $150,000 for damages and unpaid HOA dues." I stood there stunned, fists clenched and shaking. The nerve of her, acting like I was the one intruding, like I was some squatter. They didn't realize who they were dealing with. My family had owned this land for generations. I took a slow, deep breath and forced myself to keep calm. But in the back of my mind, wheels were already turning. "You've just made a serious mistake," I said, staring her down. She laughed like it was all a big joke. "You've got 30 days to pay or leave. After that, we'll handle it legally. Good luck." With a final smug grin, she spun around and strutted back to her SUV. The workers packed up their tools and followed her out, leaving me standing there silent, furious. But they had no clue. I wasn't some drifter. That fence they put up, it cut through my property. The road they claimed, also mine. Even part of the lakefront they said was theirs, and my deed covered it all. Still, I didn't reveal that just yet. They wanted a fight, they'd get one. As I stared at the fence slicing through my family cabin, rage and determination twisted inside me. This wasn't just about land anymore. This was about principle. They thought they could intimidate me, force me out, but they were about to find out exactly how wrong they were. Before I go on, I want to know where you're tuning in from. Drop your city, state, or country in the comments. I'm curious to see how far this story reaches. Now, let me back things up and explain how this all began. My name's Mark. I'm 43 years old, a full-time mechanic, and I've always looked forward to weekends spent at my family's lake cabin, built by my grandfather back in the 1960s. That place had been our little slice of heaven for decades, as long before any HOA ever existed around here. Over time, the area grew. The Lakeside Meadows community sprang up along the shoreline. And of course, with it came an HOA and all their absurd rules and restrictions on paint colors, grass height, even how many guests you could invite over. But I didn't live in their gated bubble. My land was private, completely separate. I never joined their association, never signed any of their contracts, and sure as hell never paid their fees. I kept to myself, expected the same in return. That all changed last summer. It started with what seemed like a friendly visit. One bright afternoon, Karen showed up at my cabin with a basket of cookies and a carefully practiced smile. She introduced herself, complimented the place, then brought up how the HOA was growing and wanted to fold my land into their jurisdiction. I politely but firmly told her number. She pushed the idea again, claiming it would boost my property value and make me part of a thriving community. I declined a second time. Still civil, but clear. That's when her mask slipped, her smile faded, and her voice turned ice cold. She warned that turning them down could complicate things. I laughed it off. I thought she was bluffing. Weeks passed, then strange things started happening. HOA vehicles parked near my road, strangers snapping photos, people with measuring tape marking trees and boundaries. One day, I caught a man walking through my yard with a clipboard. I confronted him, and he claimed to be surveying for upcoming developments. I called the sheriff, but by the time they arrived, the guy had already vanished. I hoped that was the end of it. Then came the morning I pulled up to find that ugly fence carved through my property like a scar. I felt powerless but also weirdly composed, because I knew something they didn't. I had evidence, ironclad proof. The original deed, property surveys, legal maps, clearly outlining my ownership. That road, my family's private access road, the lakefront they fenced off, ours too. But instead of rushing to court, I chose patience. I wanted them to go all in to trap themselves. As the sun dipped below the trees, I sat on the porch, staring at that fence. That's when I heard the crunch of tires again. Another black SUV. Two men in suits stepped out, papers in hand. One approached and said, "Mr. Mark, you've been served. You are officially being sued for $150,000 in damages and unpaid fees." One of the suited men said. My jaw clenched as I accepted the paperwork. This was odd, their opening shot. They assumed a lawsuit would scare me into surrendering, but I wasn't backing down. As their SUV pulled away, something inside me hardened. They had no idea who they were provoking. This wasn't just property. This was my family's legacy, and I wasn't about to let them take it. They thought they had the upper hand, but in reality, the fight had only begun. Then, as if the day couldn't possibly get worse, my phone buzzed. A new text message, from an unlisted number. "Better sell your cabin before it's too late." I stood frozen, staring at the screen. A threat? I scanned the area around me, suddenly aware of the eerie stillness. My eyes darted to the tree line, half expecting someone to step out of the shadows. Then I heard Ida footsteps. They were coming from beyond the fence. The night had grown colder, the kind of chill that creeps under your skin. My grip tightened on the phone as I listened. The footsteps drew closer, crunching slowly on gravel, each one deliberate. I edged toward the fence, peering through the wooden slats. The moonlight shimmered off the lake, casting a ghostly glow over everything. My cabin, once a place of peace, now felt like something out of a suspense film. "Who's there?" I called out. No answer, just footsteps. I reached for the flashlight hanging beside the door, flipped it on, and aimed it through the gaps in the fence. I caught a glimpse of something, a shape, maybe a persona, but when the beam hit the spot, there was nothing, just empty air. And then, silence. Another buzz from my phone. "We warned you." A cold shiver ran down my spine. I didn't know if this was some twisted game the HOA was playing, a stranger trying to intimidate me, or something even darker. But one thing was clear: this wasn't random. I wasn't just being sued, I was being watched. Shaking, I stepped back into the cabin and locked the door behind me. I pulled the blinds shut and sat at the worn table where my grandfather used to play cards. The same table now covered in legal documents demanding money I didn't owe. $150,000 for damage and fees I had no legal obligation to pay. I'd never agreed to anything with the HOA. They had no jurisdiction here, and they knew it. Still, they pushed forward, bold, ruthless. I thought of my grandfather, a tough, principled, the kind of man who never backed down from what was right. I could almost hear him reminding me to stand tall, to never let anyone steal what's yours. That memory lit a fire in me. I wasn't giving up. The next morning, I called my lawyer, an old friend named David who'd handled property cases before. When I explained the situation, there was a long pause. Then he said, "They built a fence through your actual cabin?" "That's right," I replied, pacing across the room. "And now they want me to pay them. This is illegal on so many levels." David said, "Send me photos of everything: a fence, cabin, the property line, docs. I'll bring in a surveyor to verify the boundaries. And don't speak to anyone from the HOA until I've had a look." "Don't worry," I said, "they won't hear a word from me." I spent the rest of the morning documenting everything: shots of the fence slicing straight through my cabin walls, the private road winding through my land, the lakefront they were trying to claim. Each image was ammo for the battle I was preparing to fight. Later that afternoon, I drove into town just to get away for a bit and clear my head. On my way out, I passed through the HOA's neighborhood. Perfect houses line the streets, each one nearly identical, a fresh paint, neatly trimmed lawns, pristine mailboxes, a picture of order. But I knew better. Underneath that spotless surface were people obsessed with control. As I rolled by, I noticed a few of them watching me, whispering, some even glaring. It was obvious the HOA had been spreading lies. At the gas station, I ran into Tom, an older guy who'd lived in the area for decades. He approached me quietly, glancing around like he didn't want to be seen. "Hey Mark," he said in a low tone, "heard what they did to your cabin. You've got to be careful. That group doesn't fight fair." "What do you mean?" I asked. "They've been trying to scoop up land around the lake for years. They pressure folks to sell cheap, then flip it for a profit. You're not their first target, but you might be the first one who's actually standing up to them." His words sank in. This wasn't just a dispute, it was a pattern, a calculated land grab, and I was the latest name on their list. When I returned to the cabin that evening, something felt a broken bar wrong. Too quiet. I circled the property and found fresh boot prints in the dirt near the fence, prints that hadn't been there when I left. Someone had come by while I was gone. That tight feeling in my gut returned. Whoever had sent those texts said they'd been here, watching me, maybe even hiding in the woods. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I'd had enough. It was time to face them. I grabbed my keys, got in my truck, and headed straight for the HOA office. The building looked modest but polished, with sleek tinted windows and a giant American flag fluttering out front. I parked directly in front, marched inside, and demanded to see Karen. And then, she appeared. Karen emerged from her office, that trademark fake smile plastered across her face. "Mark," she chirped, sugary sweet. "What a surprise. Here to settle your outstanding balance?" I slammed the stack of legal papers onto her desk. "You had no authority to put up a fence on my property," I snapped. "And demanding $150,000 from me? That's pure fantasy." Her smile vanished, replaced with a cold, calculating stare. "Your property?" she said flatly. "According to our survey, it's whole land now." "What survey?" I shot back. "The one we commissioned last month," she replied smugly. "Our documentation clearly shows that the RODA and a portion of your cabina now fall within Lakeside Meadows jurisdiction, which makes you a trespasser." "Mark," I let out a bitter laugh, "your so-called survey means nothing. I have the original deed. This land has been in my family for generations, so long before your HOA ever existed." Karen leaned back in her chair, totally unfazed. "Then I guess we'll see you in court. But let me warn you, legal proceedings can get very expensive. You might want to consider selling before this ruins you." It was a thinly veiled threat, but I didn't flinch. "We'll see who ends up ruined," I said, turning and walking out. As I stepped outside, I noticed a black pickup truck parked across the street. The driver was staring at me stone-faced, unmoving. I got into my own vehicle, and as soon as I pulled away, the truck fired up and began following. Every muscle in my body tensed. This wasn't coincidence. This was intimidation. I didn't go straight back to the cabin. I took a detour, pulled into a busy public parking lot, and waited. Sure enough, the truck circled a few times, then finally drove off. Whoever that was, they weren't just some nosy neighbor. They were tied to the HOA, of that I was certain. By the time I returned to my property, it was late. I parked, climbed up onto the porch, and sat in silence under the moonlight. My home, once my sanctuary, and now felt like enemy territory. That night, I locked every door and window before trying to sleep. But somewhere in the middle of the night, I was jolted awake by the sound of hammering. My pulse spiked. I grabbed my flashlight and rushed to the window. Shadows moved along the fence line. Someone was working out there in the dark. I stormed outside, flashlight beam cutting through the night. "Hey, who's out there?" I yelled. The hammering stopped. The figures froze. Then, just as suddenly, they bolted, vanishing into the trees. I reached the fence and saw what they'd left behind. A brand new sign nailed to the wood. Big red letters screamed, "Trespassers will be prosecuted." They weren't just building fences anymore. They were escalating. My phone buzzed again. Another anonymous message: "Leave while you still can." My hands clenched around the phone. The fear was gone, replaced by boiling anger. This wasn't about borders anymore, it was personal, a full-blown war. And just as I turned to head back to the house, headlights burst through the dark, a vehicle tore down the gravel road and skidded to a stop just feet from the fence. The driver's side door opened slowly, a man stepped out, something metallic glinting in his hand. I aimed the flashlight at him and caught the reflection of a crowbar. He didn't move, just stood there in the beam of light. He looked from mid-40s, hoodie pulled low over his face, and eyes like ice. "Who the hell are you?" I demanded, my voice cutting through the still air. He didn't answer at first, just tapped the crowbar against his thigh. Clink, clink, clink. Each tap sent a chill through my spine. "You need to leave," he finally growled. "This ain't your land anymore. You've been warned." I stood my ground. "This is my land, and I'm not going anywhere." A crooked smile tugged at his lips. "Then you're a damn fool." Without warning, he turned and swung the crowbar into the fence, splintering one of the boards with a sharp crack. The sound echoed into the trees. Then, just like that, he was gone. He jumped back into his car and sped off, dust swirling behind him. My hands were still shaking when I called the sheriff. Deputies arrived about 20 minutes later, but the man was long gone. They took my statement, inspected the damage, and promised more patrols. But I could tell by the look in their eyes that they knew it would be hard to pin this on anyone. If he was hired muscle, the HOA made sure there were no direct ties. After they left, I stood out in the cold staring at the broken board. I wasn't scared anymore. I was furious. They thought threats would drive me out, thought they could use fear and muscle to break me, but they underestimated the wrong man. The next morning, after a few hours of restless sleep, I brewed a pot of coffee and sat down at my grandfather's old table. I pulled out his leather folder, worn from age but carefully organized. Inside were the original deeds, survey maps, and legal records. Every boundary, every legal point clearly marked. My grandfather had prepared for everything. And now, those records were going to be my shield. I felt a renewed sense of pride. This land wasn't just Mania, it was part of my family's story, and I was going to protect it. I called David. "They sent someone to my property last night. Guy had a crowbar," I told him. There was a pause. Then David sighed. "They're trying to scare you into surrendering, but don't worry, we've got legal grounds. I'll start filing a restraining order against the HOA for harassment, and we'll get that court date locked in. Let's end this once and for all." David said, "Do it," I replied without hesitation. After hanging up, I headed outside to repair the section of fence that had been damaged. Not because it was mine, but to make a statement. I replaced the broken plank with a sturdier one, then took a can of red spray paint and wrote across it in bold, aggressive letters, "Private property, 8 trespassers will be arrested." I wanted them to see it. I wanted them to know I wasn't backing down. As I drove in the final nail, a familiar car pulled up. It was Tomo, the old local who had warned me about the HOA from the beginning. He stepped out, shaking his head. "They're coming at you hard, huh?" "Yeah," I said, wiping sweat from my brow. "They sent someone last night." Guy showed up with a crowbar. Tom's expression darkened. "That sounds about right. They act like they own this whole lake. But the truth is, they hate people like you, people with a spine. Most folks just fold and sell." "I'm not most folks," I told him. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Be careful. Karen's got influence, money, lawyers, a broken bar, even a few deputies who conveniently look the other way. But I've seen people like her fall before. Just don't let your guard down." His warning gave me both strength and a sobering reminder. This wasn't just about property, it was about standing up to power-hungry bullies who thought they could take whatever they wanted. The next few days were eerily quiet, too quiet. I spent the time repairing damage to the cabin, tidying up the land, and keeping a close watch on my surroundings. It felt like the calm before the next storm. Then, early on the 4th morning, I was jolted awake by the sound of heavy machinery. I jumped out of bed and ran outside. There it was, a bulldozer, idling at the edge of my land like some beast waiting to strike. Several HOA workers in neon vests were clustered nearby, pointing at the access road that led up to my cabin. And of course, Karen was there too, arms crossed, lips curled in a satisfied smirk. "What the hell are you doing?" I yelled. Karen didn't blink. "We're reclaiming the road," You were warned. We're removing your illegal barriers to make this area safe and accessible for our community. I ran toward them, furious. This isn't your road. You can't just come onto my land. The bulldozer's engine revved. The machine lurched forward. I could feel the ground vibrate as it rolled toward my driveway, threatening to tear it up right before my eyes. I didn't think. I moved on instinct. I planted myself in front of the machine, arms stretched out, refusing to budge. The driver slowed but didn't cut the engine. He glared at me through the windshield. Behind him, Karen stepped forward. "Move, Mark," she snapped, "or I'll have you arrested for obstructing the community project." "This is private land," I shouted. "You're trespassing." The bulldozer roared again, its steel blade catching the sunlight. For a moment, I wondered if they'd really go through with Ida, if the driver would risk running me down. Then, flashing lights appeared at the edge of the road. A sheriff's vehicle pulled up, sirens off but lights flashing. Two deputies jumped out and ordered the driver to shut the bulldozer down immediately. Karen's smug expression faltered. The engine went quiet. Everything froze. The deputies stepped between us, asking everyone to back away. My hands trembled as I handed over the deed to my land. "This is my property," I said, voice firm. "They have no right to be here." Karen crossed her arms tightly. "We have our own survey. This belongs to the HOA." One of the deputies looked from my documents to hers, clearly unsure how to proceed. "This is a civil issue," he said at last. "You'll need to resolve it in court. But for now, everyone needs to leave." Karen shot me a look full of contempt. "This isn't over, Mark." "Not even close." Her workers packed up, and their caravan disappeared down the road. Relief washed over me, but it didn't erase the rage. They'd been seconds away from demolishing my only access road. This wasn't just about harassment anymore, it was full-scale warfare. That night, while locking up, my phone buzzed. A new message. This one more disturbing than all the rest. "Next time, the sheriff won't be there to stop us." I stared at the screen, heart sinking. I stepped out onto the porch and scanned the darkness, the air thick with tension. I didn't doubt for a second they meant it. Then I heard idle footsteps on the porch. Before I could react, the front door handle rattled violently. Someone was trying to force their way in. The knob jerked against the frame with sharp, deliberate movements. My pulse thundered in my ears. I grabbed the old shotgun my grandfather had stored in the hall closet. Hand shaking, I aimed the barrel at the door. "Who's out there?" I shouted, my voice louder than I expected. The noise stopped. For a moment, silence. Then a deep voice spoke from the other side. "You can't stay here forever, Mark. You've been warned." I darted to the window and yanked the blinds aside just in time to see a figure disappearing into the trees. I could barely make out his form, a tall, heavy-set, hoodie pulled up, but I couldn't see his face. I didn't hesitate. I called the sheriff. By the time they arrived, the intruder was long gone. They found boot prints circling the porch and scuff marks on the doorknob, clear signs of tampering, but no suspect in sight. "Keep everything locked up tight," one deputy told me. "Stay alert." As their taillights faded into the night, I stood on the porch gripping the shotgun. The night was cool, but I was drenched in sweat. This had gone beyond threats or intimidation. They were trying to break me, and they had no idea just how far I was willing to go. The table in front of me was covered in paperwork, old deeds with frayed edges, faded seals, and my grandfather's signature still visible in bold ink. These documents were more than legal proof. They were a legacy, one my grandfather had fought to protect, and now, that responsibility had passed to me. As the first light of morning crept through the trees, I picked up the phone and called David. "They tried to break in last night," I told him. "You're kidding," he said, voice suddenly sharp. "I wish I was. This isn't just harassment anymore," he muttered. "This is criminal. I'm going to reach out to the authorities and request a protective order. In the meantime, document everything, photos, messages, boot prints, whatever you can get." "I've already started," I said, grabbing my camera. I went around the cabin snapping photos of the footprints in the dirt, the scuffed-up door, the threatening text still glowing on my phone screen. Every shutter click felt like one more layer of armor. They weren't scaring me, they were fueling my resolve. Later that day, I drove down to the county records office to retrieve the official survey maps. I needed more than just family documents. I needed irrefutable evidence. The clerk, a kind older woman named Janice, pulled the files without hesitation. As she handed me the maps, she leaned in and spoke softly. "Be careful, Mark. Karen's HOA has gone after people before. Boot to broken bar, you might be the first one with the backbone to push back." I nodded, thanked her, and left with the maps in hand. Once home, I laid them out alongside my grandfather's deeds. They lined up perfectly. The road, the cabin, the lakefront, all on my land. That feeling of confidence didn't last long. As I pulled into my driveway, my gut twisted. Someone had vandalized the fence again this time. The message was unmistakable. In thick black paint, the words screamed, "Sell or else." The paint was still wet. It dripped down the boards like blood. My stomach turned. The threats were becoming more direct. I photographed everything and called the sheriff again. Another report filed. Another warning logged. It was clear they were escalating. That evening, Tom came by. When he saw the fresh graffiti, he let out a heavy sigh. "They're cornered," he said. "And desperate people make dumb choices. Be careful, Mark." "I'm not walking away," I told him flatly. Tom stared at me for a moment before nodding. "Good, but be ready. The worst might still be ahead." We sat on the porch for a while, watching the sun sink behind the lake. The water shimmered like glass, still and quiet. It almost looked like nothing had changed, like the chaos wasn't slowly building all around it. We talked about the old days, fishing trips with my grandfather, campfires, laughter echoing across the water. Those memories reminded me why I had to fight. This land wasn't just real estate. It was home. It was history. The next day, David called with an update. "I filed an emergency injunction. They're legally barred from altering anything on your property until the court date." Relief washed over me. "That's great news. Don't get too comfortable," David warned. "They're going to push back hard." His warning felt prophetic. That afternoon, I found a white envelope taped to my front door. I tore it open and felt my blood start to boil. A letter from the HOA's attorneys. They were now expanding their claim to include not only the road, but a portion of the lakefront as well. They demanded $200,000 in damages and insisted that I immediately dismantle a unauthorized structure, meaning my cabin. I let out a dry, humorless laugh, the kind you make when something's so ridiculous, there's no other reaction. "So that's how they want to play," I muttered. "Fine, let's play." That night, I stayed up late reviewing every document I had. I scanned and organized the deeds, maps, text threats, and police reports. I even installed trail cameras along the property, linear hidden, high-res, and night vision capable. If they came back, I'd have them on record. Around midnight, I found myself sitting on the porch, shotgun resting beside me. The lake was still. Moonlight danced on the surface like silver threads. It should have been peaceful. But something in the air told me it wasn't over. Then I saw Ida headlights crawling slowly up the access road. I stood, gripping the shotgun tightly. The vehicle stopped just short of the driveway, engine humming. For a moment, it didn't move. Then the door swung open and Karen stepped out, dressed flawlessly as usual, but her face was tight with fury. "You think you are clever, Mark?" she snarled. "You think you can stop us?" I didn't respond. I just stared. She stepped closer, voice dropping into something colder. "You are going to regret this. We run this community, and soon, we'll run this land too." She jabbed a finger toward the fence. "Enjoy it while you can, because tomorrow, we're coming back with a court order. That cabin's coming down." She spun on her heel, marched back to her car, and tore off into the night with a screech of tires. I stood there, fists clenched, the shotgun now hanging loosely by my side. Tomorrow, it was happening. I didn't sleep. I stayed outside all night, eyes scanning the road, ears straining for any sound. And then at sunrise I heard it, a deep, rolling thunder of engines. More than one. I stepped to the edge of my porch as a convoy rumbled into view. Trucks, bulldozers, SUVs. They rolled in like a small army, dust billowing behind them. At least 3 work trucks, 2 bulldozers, and a black SUV leading the group. The ground trembled as they came to a stop. Karen stepped out of the lead vehicle, dressed in bright red, as if she were about to walk a red carpet instead of start a demolition. Behind her, a cluster of HOA board members followed like a pack of vultures. The HOA board stood there with smug grins, clipboards tucked under their arms like trophies. One of the bulldozers roared to life, its steel blade catching the morning light. The driver revved the engine, ready to tear through whatever stood in its way. Karen raised her voice for all to hear. "Mark, as of today, the HOA has full authority to remove unauthorized structures from our property, including this sad little cabin you're squatting in." I stepped forward, lifting my deed high above my head. "This is my property. You have no legal right to be here." She tilted her head with a mocking smile. "That piece of paper isn't going to protect you. We have a court order." With a dramatic flourish, she waved a folder and gestured for one of the board members to hand me a copy. I scanned it quickly. It had the appearance of legitimacy signatures, stamps, but the language was vague and intentionally misleading. It vaguely referenced community lands without any specifics. David had warned me they'd try to use confusing legal jargon to bluff their way through. "You really think this will hold up in court?" I asked, keeping my tone even despite the anger rising in my chest. "This document is meaningless." Karen's smile grew wider. "We'll see." "Take it down," she ordered. The bulldozer jerked forward. Without thinking, I sprinted in front of it, planting myself in its path with arms spread wide. "You'll have to run me over first." The operator hesitated, clearly unsure. Karen barked, "Do it, he's trespassing." My pulse was hammering so loudly I could barely hear the engine. The machine crept forward, and the ground trembled beneath me. I stood my ground, legs locked, refusing to move. Then, like a lifeline, a siren pierced the morning air. Within seconds, 2 sheriff's vehicles sped onto the property, red and blue lights flashing. Officers jumped out, shouting for everyone to halt. The bulldozer stopped just a few feet from where I stood. The lead deputy approached, eyeing the scene. "What's going on here?" Karen rushed over, waving the so-called court order in his face. "This man is illegally occupying whole land. We're here under legal authority to remove his structures." The officer took the papers, gave them a quick glance, and then turned to me. "Do you have proof this is your land?" Without a word, I handed him the original deed from my grandfather, the official survey maps, and all the supporting documentation I'd collected. He examined everything carefully, brow creased with focus. After a few moments, he looked up and said firmly, "These records clearly establish this as private property. Until a judge says otherwise, you've got no authority here." Karen's face flushed deep red. "Boot a broken bar but the HOA." The deputy cut her off. "Ma'am, if you proceed with any demolition, you'll be arrested for trespassing and destruction of private property." For the first time, Karen was speechless. Her mouth opened but no words came. The officers ordered her crew to stand down. The bulldozer's engine rumbled to a stop, and the trucks began to back away. Karen shot me a glare as she retreated to her SUV. "This isn't over, Mark. You just made the biggest mistake of your life." I stared back and replied coolly, "No, Karen, you did." As the HOA convoy drove off, the deputies remained to ensure everything was secure. One of them gave me a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "You did the right thing. Stand firm, keep your documents close. They'll be back." The days that followed were tense but quiet. I repaired the damaged boards on my porch and checked the trail cameras regularly. I was constantly on edge, waiting for the next move. Then one night, the cameras caught eye to 2 masked individuals sneaking around the edge of my property. They spray-painted graffiti on the side of the cabin and shattered one of the windows before vanishing into the night. I called the sheriff's office again, filed another report, and handed over the footage. The deputies promised to investigate, but I knew the HOA would deny any involvement. Still, piece by piece, the evidence was stacking up. Meanwhile, David was working behind the scenes, filing for a formal injunction to legally bar the HOA from coming near my property. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks out. Until then, I had to stay alert. One afternoon, while I was patching up the broken window, Tom stopped by again. His face was serious. "Mark," he said in a low voice, "I overheard something. The HOA's holding a meeting tonight. Word I said they're planning to block your access to the lake. Again, this time with concrete barriers." I clenched my jaw. "Let them try. I'll be ready." That night, I stayed up watching the road like a hawk, Sure enough, around 2 a.m., headlights flickered through the trees. A truck slowly reversed down the road. Men jumped out and began unloading enormous concrete blocks. They were really doing it. I grabbed my shotgun and walked toward them, shouting, "You're trespassing. Get off my land." They froze, startled, but didn't stop. One of them shouted back, "You don't have the right. This is whole land." Right then, the motion lights from one of my trail cams snapped in awe, illuminating everything. The camera was rolling, catching them in the act. I kept yelling, making sure my voice was caught on the audio too. "You're committing a crime. I'm calling the sheriff right now." They scrambled, tossing the remaining blocks and bolting back into the truck. The engine roared and they sped off, leaving the job half done. I made the call. Deputies arrived shortly after and helped move the barriers off my road. By the time the sun began to rise, my access to the lake was open once again. By sunrise, I was beyond exhausted, but I felt a grim sense of victory. I'd gathered even more proof of their harassment, though it was obvious the HOA wasn't backing down. The next day, a certified envelope arrived. It was from their lawyers, a so-called final warning. They demanded an immediate payment of $250,000 and threatened to take my property if I didn't comply. My blood boiled. They were grasping at straws now, and when people get desperate, they slip up. I crushed the letter in my hand just as the sound of tires crunching gravel reached my ears. Karen's sleek black SUV rolled to a stop at the edge of my driveway. She stepped out with an overly sweet smile, the kind that masked venom. "Mark," she said in a syrupy tone, "this doesn't have to keep going. Sell me the cabin. I'll pay you fairly. We can end this nonsense." I stared at her. Cold. "You call vandalizing my home, sending threats, and trying to tear it down a negotiation?" Her fake smile faded. "You'll regret turning me down." I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "No, Karen, you'll regret underestimating me." Her eyes hardened before she turned and stomped back to her SUV, tires spinning as she drove off. That night, my phone buzzed again, a new message from the same unknown number. "Tomorrow we finish this." The words sent a shiver down my spine. What did that mean, finish how? I didn't sleep. I sat on the porch, shotgun resting across my lap, watching the shadows shift as the night dragged on. Around 3 a.m., the stillness shattered. Engines roared to life, and several trucks rumbled down the road, headlights cutting through the darkness like blades. This wasn't intimidation anymore. They came to destroy. The first bulldozer charged forward, the driver not even hesitating. He aimed straight at my porch and then crash. The blade slammed into the structure, sending wood splinters flying in every direction. The force shook the ground beneath me. The blade cut through the wall like it was paper. Boards snapped, glass exploded, and the porch crumbled with a thunderous collapse. I stumbled backward, shielding my face as debris flew past. My heart thudded so hard it felt like it might rip through my chest. They were actually doing it, tearing down my home right in front of me. "Stop, you're trespassing," I screamed, barely heard over the engine's roar. Karen stood nearby, arms crossed, her face calm and cruel. "Flatten it," she barked to the crew, voice like ice. I fumbled for my phone, hitting record. "I'm calling the sheriff," I yelled. Karen let out a laugh. "You really think they'll show up this time? We've already taken care of that." Her confidence chilled me. Did she have someone on the inside? Was that why she was so fearless tonight? The bulldozer rammed forward again, smashing more of the wall. My fury exploded. I fired my shotgun into the air. The shot echoed across the property like a cannon blast, freezing everyone in their tracks. The workers stopped, glanced around uneasily. I pointed the gun at the ground but made my intentions clear. One more move on my property, and I'll defend it. Karen's face twisted in rage. "You're insane. Drop the weapon before you're the one getting arrested." I barked back. "Every second of this is on camera. This is evidence, Karen." The standoff held for a tense moment. The workers hesitated, clearly unsure. Then, like a beacon of hope, headlights appeared on the road. 2 sheriff's vehicles raced toward us, sirens screaming. Relief hit me like a wave. They skidded to a halt, lights flashing. Deputies leapt out, weapons ready. "Step away from the equipment, now!" Karen rushed forward, shouting and waving that same court order. This is HOA property. He's the trespasser." The lead deputy snatched the documents from her and quickly skimmed them. Then he turned to me. "Do you have proof this is your land?" I handed him the deed, survey maps, and my phone, already playing the video I'd recorded. He studied everything, then faced Karen. "This is private property," he said bluntly. "You and your people are trespassing. Shut everything down, immediately." Karen's jaw fell open. "You can't do that, he cut her off. "Ma'am, one more word and you'll be in the back of our cruiser tonight." The bulldozer's engine sputtered to a stop. The crew backed away, looking uncomfortable. Karen's face turned beet red, but she had no choice. She spun on her heel, barked at her crew, and stormed back to her SUV. As they drove off, one of the workers muttered a quiet, "Sorry, man," before following behind. The deputies stayed to take official statements. "You need a restraining order fast," one of them told me. "These people are escalating." "I'm already on it," I said, my hands still trembling. When they left, I stood among the wreckage of my cabin. The porch was gone. Part of the wall lay torn open to the night air. It was devastating, but I was still here, and the land was still mine. I spent the rest of the night boarding up the broken sections, too furious to rest. At sunrise, David arrived. When he saw the damage, his expression darkened. "They've gone too far," he muttered. "They crossed the line a long time ago," I replied bitterly. David nodded. "We're going to court." Now, with this footage, the reports, and the sheriff's statement that they don't stand a chance. Over the next few days, I stayed alert. The trail cams kept capturing movement of figures in hoodies creeping around at night. They left garbage on the property, spray-painted threats on the fence. Every time I called the sheriff, every time I added it to the mountain of evidence. Despite the fear, despite the tension, I wasn't going anywhere. There were still occasional moments of calm. Tom came by frequently to lend a hand with repairs on the cabin. We'd sit by the fire, swapping old stories, and in those quiet moments, I remembered exactly why this place meant the world to me. It wasn't just a patch of land, it held my roots, my memories, my peace. Then came the court day. I walked into the courthouse beside David, carrying everything of photos, videos, documents. Karen and the HOA board were already there, looking smug, as if the outcome was guaranteed in their favor. But as the judge examined the evidence, her demeanor changed. "This is blatant harassment and trespassing," she stated. "The HOA has no jurisdiction over Mr. Mark's property. Effective immediately, they are barred from entering his land, obstructing his road, or limiting his access to the lake." Karen went pale. The judge continued, "Mr. Mark is within his rights to pursue compensation for the damage to his property." David nodded and said, "We intend to, Your Honor." The sound of the gavel hitting the bench echoed like a thunderclap. We had won, at least, that's what I thought. As we walked out of the courtroom, Karen brushed past me, her expression filled with venom. She hissed under her breath, "This isn't over. You'll wish you never challenged us." I met her glare. "Go ahead and try." That night, Tom and I had a small, quiet celebration. We grilled some steaks, sipped a few beers, and watched the sun dip behind the lake. It was the first time in weeks I'd felt even a hint of peace. But it didn't last. Just after midnight, my phone buzzed again. A message from the same unknown number. No text this time, just a photo. My cabin, taken from the trees, and in the corner, flames flickering near the porch. Before I could process it, the smell of smoke hit me. I raced outside. Fire had already begun climbing up the side of the cabin. It was spreading fast. Someone had come back to finish what they started. The flames crackled loudly, sparks flying into the night sky, eyes burning from the smoke. I grabbed the garden hose and sprayed the base of the fire with everything I had. My pulse thundered. I yelled for help, though deep down I knew no one else was nearby. The fire quickly devoured the damaged sections from the previous attack. The stench of burning wood filled the air. I fumbled with my phone and called 911. "My cabin's on fire." Someone said, "Ida, please, send help." The dispatcher said the fire crew was on their way, but I knew they were still miles out. I couldn't just stand by. I bolted inside, coughing, and grabbed a fire extinguisher, doing what I could to push the flames back. The blaze roared toward the roof. Just when I thought I couldn't keep going, headlights pierced the darkness. Tom had arrived. He jumped out of his truck with 2 more extinguishers. I saw the smoke from the road. He shouted, "Help me, they set it ablaze." I cried. Together we fought the fire, dousing it with water and foam until the fire trucks finally rolled up. Firefighters poured in, hacking away at the burning structure and blasting it with hoses. After what felt like forever, the fire was out. The cabin was half charred, the porch a pile of blackened debris. I was crushed. When the fire marshal confirmed the cause as arson, my grief turned into fury. The sheriff arrived and took our statements. I showed him the photo and text. He studied it grimly. "They're not hiding anymore," he said. "This is felony-level arson. We're going to find out who's behind it." I already knew. It was Karen, the hoe. They had gone too far. The next morning, David came by. One look at the damage in his jaw clenched. "They've sealed their fate," he said. "Now it's criminal. We're not just suing you, we're pressing charges." Fortunately, the trail cams had captured everything. Hooded figures with gas cans skulking around the cabin. Their faces weren't fully hidden either. When I showed the sheriff, he said, "We've got enough. We'll get the warrants." I stayed with Tom while the investigation ramped up. Deputies raided the homes of several home members. They found burner phones, gas cans, and other damning evidence. Karen was arrested first, kicking and screaming about being innocent, but the rest of the board followed quickly. Once word spread, the entire neighborhood turned on the hoe. People were furious. The organization collapsed in disgrace. In the following weeks, I stood on the rebuilt porch of my cabin. Insurance had paid for the repairs, and the court had awarded damages, allowing me to restore everything better than ever. The lake shimmered in the daylight, calm and victorious. Karen and her co-conspirators were handed lengthy prison sentences for arson, harassment, and conspiracy. I still remembered the judge's words, "No one is above the law, not even the president of NHO." I inhaled the crisp air, finally feeling the peace I'd fought tooth and nail to reclaim. This land had weathered decades and now it had endured something far worse. Sitting on the new porch, gazing across the water, I reflected on the lessons burned into me. Bullies like Karen survive on intimidation, but once you stand tall and fight back with truth and evidence, they fold. Kindness matters, but when someone tries to steal what's yours, you fight it with everything you've got. I lifted a glass to the sky and whispered, "We did it, old man. We kept the land." Then, one last time, my phone buzzed. A new message from the same unknown number. My heart skipped as I opened it. "You may have won this round, but someone else is coming. Watch the lake." I stared out over the water, still, quiet, but beneath that surface a secret stirred. This battle was over, but the lake, it still had stories left to tell.